My name is Diane Hayes, and for the last 12 years, I have poured every ounce of energy into a business that I believed in deeply. It wasn't glamorous or high-profile, but it was real. It was a family-owned company in a small town where I started at the bottom, answering calls and doing whatever was needed. I worked tirelessly, sacrificing family time and personal milestones, all for a company I thought valued loyalty and hard work. I helped build relationships, managed accounts, negotiated contracts, and led a team of people who trusted me. It wasn't just a job, it was my second family, and I gave everything I had to make it succeed. When I started at 23, I had no idea how deeply I would come to care about this place. I wanted to climb the ladder, to make a difference, and I worked long hours, nights, weekends, and holidays. I watched the business grow, celebrated our wins, and took the losses to heart. But after all this time, something had shifted. The work environment wasn't what it used to be. The company had expanded, and with it, the warmth and family feel had faded. It had become more about numbers and less about the people. And then came Ryan, the new owner, a young man in his early 30s who inherited the company from his father. I remember the first time I met him. He was polished, confident, and a little too detached for my taste. He didn't understand the culture of the company we had built, and it showed. The first time I really noticed him was that morning standing by the coffee machine just like any other. It was early, and I was adding a bit of oat milk to my coffee, preparing for another day of balancing the workload with my responsibilities at home. I had always treasured these quiet moments, taking a deep breath before diving into the chaos of the day. But then Ryan walked in. He didn't greet me, didn't make eye contact. He just walked past, glued to his phone like I was invisible. "Diane," he said, not looking up, "I need you in my office."
Now.
I froze. The words didn't quite register at first.
Now.
I repeated, feeling the tension rise in my chest. He didn't say anything else, just motioned for me to follow him. I had a sinking feeling that something was terribly wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. As I walked behind him down the hallway, I tried to steady myself. I had been through countless challenges over the years. What could this be? When we reached his office, he didn't even offer me a seat. He barely looked up from the papers in front of him. "You're fired," he said flatly, his voice cold. "We don't need people like you here anymore. You're holding us back." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind raced. I blinked, not sure if I had heard him correctly. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You heard me," he said again, still flipping through his papers. "You can pack your things and leave. Effective immediately." The room seemed to close in on me, and for a moment, I felt the world spinning around me. Everything I had done for the last 12 years felt meaningless in that instant. How could this be happening? I was blindsided. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation. But instead, I smiled. It wasn't an easy smile. It was forced, deliberate, but calm. "Understood," I said, my voice steady. "Have a good day, Ryan." I turned and walked out of his office, my hands trembling, my heart heavy with a mix of disbelief and betrayal. As I packed my desk, I couldn't help but reflect on everything I had given to this company. Late nights, weekends, missed holidays with my family. I had built relationships, solved problems, and dedicated myself to its success. And yet, in the blink of an eye, it all meant nothing. As I left the office that day, I didn't know what I was going to do next, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. I had too much to offer, too much to give. I would find a way to turn this setback into something bigger. The next morning, just as I was sitting down with my second cup of coffee, still trying to process what had happened the day before, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. For a split second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. I didn't think I could take another blow to the gut. But something inside me said, "Pick it up." So I did. "Diane, it's Richard Cole." My breath caught. "Mr.
Cole.
The founder of the company. The man who hired me when I was fresh out of college." "I just walked into the office," he said, his voice strained. "Why the hell did you pack up your desk?" There was genuine confusion, even anger, in his voice. I hesitated, unsure how to answer, without sounding bitter. Your son fired me yesterday, I said quietly. Silence followed. Then I heard papers rustling on his end, followed by a sharp thud. He what? His tone changed, now a mix of disbelief and outrage. He said I wasn't needed anymore, I added, swallowing hard. That I was dragging the company down. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, slow and heavy, like he was trying to keep himself from yelling. Diane, he said slowly. Did he even read your contract? I furrowed my brow. What do you mean? You're the lead on the Kingswell account, correct? Yes, we were scheduled to meet with them this Friday. I'd been preparing the final proposal for the last 6 months. Another pause, then a muttered, Jesus Christ. More papers shuffled, louder this time. Diane, your contract has a clause, one I personally added after the last acquisition mess. You're not just the account manager. You're the only authorized negotiator for Kingswell. Legally, ethically, practically, he can't close that deal without you. I sat motionless on my couch, the cool ceramic of my coffee mug warming my hands. I stared ahead at nothing, the weight of his words sinking in. He didn't read it. Ryan fired me without realizing I was the key to the biggest contract our company had seen in over 5 years. I was stunned, but then something shifted. Something deep. I had spent the last 24 hours feeling worthless, invisible, discarded.
But now?
Now I realized the power had never left me. It had just been ignored. He didn't know. I whispered, more to myself than to Mr. Cole. No, Mr. Cole confirmed. He didn't. And now he's scheduled to meet Kingswell in less than 2 hours. I could almost hear the panic building in his voice, though he tried to mask it with control. Diane, he continued, quieter now, you don't need to come in today, but I want you to know that what he did was wrong. And reckless. My heart pounded. I felt the ache of betrayal still clinging to me, but alongside it came something I hadn't felt in a long time, resolve. I wasn't just another employee. I was essential, and Ryan, in his arrogance, had played a dangerous hand without even knowing what cards were on the table. Thank you for telling me, I said gently. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I appreciate your honesty. If you're willing to talk, he added, I'd like to meet. Privately. Before that contract falls apart. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I looked around my living room, the room where I had spent countless late nights working from home, taking calls during dinner, reviewing spreadsheets with one eye on the baby monitor. All those sacrifices hadn't been for nothing. My worth was written in ink on a page Ryan never bothered to read. And now he'd find out the hard way. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt something stronger.
Control.
This wasn't just a second chance. It was my moment to remind them who I was and why I mattered. I didn't have to wait long. By 10:13 a.m., just a few hours after my call with Mr. Cole, my phone lit up with a number I knew all too well, Ryan. I let it ring. Then again. Voicemail. I didn't check it. A few minutes later, the receptionist called. Then accounting. Then legal. My phone buzzed nonstop like it was New Year's Eve in Times Square. But I didn't answer any of them. Not yet. I wasn't ready to come rushing back like a desperate employee grateful to be remembered. I wasn't a favor to be recalled. I was an asset that never should have been thrown away. Still, curiosity got the best of me, and eventually, I tapped on the voicemail icon. Diane, hi, it's Ryan. His voice sounded strained, hollow. I think there was a misunderstanding yesterday. I may have acted a bit fast. We need you to come back. It's urgent. Please call me. That word, urgent, rolled around in my head like a marble in a jar. There was no apology, no ownership, just corporate panic wearing a polite mask. I sat there for a moment, staring at the wall, my half-drunk coffee now cold in my hands. At 10:32, another name popped up on my screen, Nicole Adams. A former colleague, one I'd mentored when she was still new to the company. We hadn't spoken in a while, not since she'd transferred to marketing. I picked up. Diane, she whispered quickly. You won't believe what's happening here. Try me, I said. Mr. Cole came in, right in the middle of the Kingswell pre-meeting. He slammed the contract down on the table in front of everyone: legal, operations, the entire boardroom. And he asked one question. "Did you read this before you fired Diane?" I closed my eyes, the image of it unfolding in my mind like a movie scene. Ryan tried to play it cool, of course. Said something about restructuring, moving in a new direction, yada yada. But Mr. Cole didn't buy it for a second. He turned to the clause, the one you always mentioned, the one that says you're the only authorized negotiator on the Kingswell account. "Diane," he flipped out. I felt my chest rise slowly with each breath. I didn't smile, but something in me settled. "He looked pale," Nicole added. "Ghost pale. Like he finally realized he pulled the pin from a grenade he didn't understand." "And what did Mr. Cole say?" I asked. "He told Ryan, and I quote, 'If this deal falls through because of your mistake, your position becomes negotiable.'" That was the first crack in Ryan's armor, and I hadn't even lifted a finger. After we hung up, I stared out the window for a long time. The skyline was still. The trees swayed gently in the breeze. It was strange, how the world kept moving even when yours had been flipped upside down just the day before. At 11:15, I received a direct message from Mr. Cole. "Diane, I'm sincerely sorry for what happened. I misjudged the situation. Please come in, not just for the deal, but so we can speak privately." I stared at it. It was tempting, but walking back in without clear boundaries?
No.
That wasn't going to happen. I typed slowly, carefully. "I'll consider returning to finalize the Kingswell deal, but only under specific conditions. I would like to speak with Mr. Cole directly beforehand." I hit send, changed out of my sweatshirt, and began preparing like I had every important client meeting for the past decade. When I arrived at the office just past noon, I didn't use the employee entrance. I walked through the front lobby. I wanted them to see me, not as someone crawling back, but as someone who had earned her place. The receptionist jumped up the second she saw me. "Ms. Hayes, Mr. Cole is expecting you." I nodded politely. As she led me down the hall, heads turned. Conversations paused. The air had shifted. I could feel it, respect, maybe curiosity, or possibly guilt. But I kept my posture straight. When Mr. Cole opened his office door and stepped aside, I walked in without hesitation. He didn't smile. "Diane," he said with a nod. "Thank you for coming." I sat across from his desk. The silence held for a moment. He closed the door behind him and sighed. "I made a mistake. A big one. I gave my son too much control, too fast. And I didn't expect him to burn bridges before he even knew how to build them." I stayed quiet. He looked me in the eye and continued. "What he did to you was unprofessional, disrespectful, and it almost cost us everything." I nodded.
Yes, it did.
For the first time in 24 hours, I felt like someone was finally seeing what I was worth. By the time the boardroom was ready and the Kingswell team had arrived, it was 1 p.m. sharp. I reviewed the final proposal for what felt like the 100th time, making sure every line was flawless, every figure double-checked. I had also prepared a translated summary, something the Kingswell CEO appreciated during our last discussion. He was the kind of man who didn't tolerate carelessness or disorganization, and one wrong step could spook the entire deal. As I laid the documents down across the polished oak table, I caught sight of Ryan pacing outside the glass walls like a restless teenager. His face was tight, and his steps were short and panicked. For someone who had fired me without a second thought, he was suddenly very interested in how the meeting would go. I didn't acknowledge him. I didn't need to.
"Mr.
Cole intercepted him just before the doors closed. I couldn't hear what was said, but I saw the sharp gesture Mr. Cole made, a hand raised mid-sentence that stopped Ryan in his tracks. Ryan looked past him, directly at me. His expression was a mix of rage, embarrassment, and something else. Fear. Then he turned and walked away, shoulders rigid, jaw clenched. That was the last I saw of him that day. At 1:30 p.m., the Kingswell delegation entered. I stood, smiled, and greeted them, beginning with a few kind words in Arabic. Something I'd picked up during the months of negotiation. Their CEO's eyes lit up, and he gave a rare smile. "You remembered," he said warmly. Respect goes a long way. And just like that, the tone of the meeting shifted. The hours that followed were nothing short of seamless. Every concern they raised, I had an answer. Every hesitance, I had a counter. Not with arrogance, but with calm confidence backed by preparation. When we finally stood to shake hands, I could feel the relief sweep through the room like a breeze. We had done it. The Kingswell deal. Months of work. A multi-million-dollar contract was signed. I had saved it. After they left, Mr. Cole approached me with a look of genuine relief on his face. "You saved us," he said, voice softer now. "And I owe you far more than an apology." I looked him in the eye. "You owe your company a leader," I replied. "Someone who knows the difference between power and responsibility."
He didn't argue.
I respected that. Later that evening, as I walked alone to my car, the wind was cool, the sky tinged with soft pinks and oranges. I took a deep breath and felt something I hadn't in days. Peace. Not victory. Not vengeance. Just peace. But deep down, I also knew this wasn't over. Not really. People like Ryan don't retreat quietly. They sulk, they stew, and when they feel cornered, they come back in subtler, more vindictive ways. And I was right. It started small. First, my reimbursement for travel expenses was delayed, despite being properly filed. Then, a set of documents I submitted for legal review came back and signed with no explanation. Next, IT flagged an email that had allegedly come from my account, containing incorrect client information that had already been forwarded to a regional partner. The partner, thankfully, had worked with me for years and knew something was off. He reached out directly to confirm, and that's when I knew this wasn't random. Someone was trying to sabotage me from the inside. And I didn't need to guess who. It was Ryan. Not directly, of course, he was too careful for that. But I could feel his fingerprints all over it. The strategy was familiar. Discredit, isolate, and let the damage accumulate until someone else questioned my ability to lead. It was textbook corporate sabotage. Years ago, fresh out of college, I worked under a director who pulled the same tricks. He didn't fire people. He made them quit. Quietly. Without resistance. But I wasn't that young woman anymore. I wasn't going to let history repeat itself. So I began documenting everything. Every missed email. Every error I didn't make. Every delay that didn't make sense. I opened a private file, logged timestamps, and took screenshots. I even started keeping a handwritten journal, a practice I learned from a mentor years ago who told me, paper trails speak louder than voices. And she was right. I wasn't going to panic. I wasn't going to beg. But I wasn't going to disappear either. Not this time. It was a Thursday afternoon when everything came to a head. I was walking past one of the smaller conference rooms when I heard Ryan's voice carrying through the door, too loud to be a private conversation. I paused only for a moment. "She's unstable," he said, his voice clipped and impatient. "Since she came back, she's been erratic, aggressive. I don't think she's fit to manage high-pressure clients." I froze. Every muscle in my body tightened. I didn't want to listen, but I couldn't move. Another voice responded, one I didn't recognize. "Maybe, but the Kingswell deal. She pulled that off under serious pressure." "She got lucky," Ryan snapped. "But we can't run a company on luck. I think we should start considering succession planning for client services. She's not the future, she's baggage." My heart pounded in my ears. The words weren't just sharp, they were surgical.
He wasn't going after my job.
He was going after my name, my credibility, my sanity. And I knew exactly what he was doing, planting seeds. Whispering lies in just the right ears, until even people who liked and respected me started to question whether they were seeing cracks. It was subtle, calculated, and deeply familiar. I had seen this tactic used before when I was younger, less sure of myself, and more eager to avoid conflict. But not this time. That night, I stayed late. The office was nearly empty. The lights dimmed except for the ones overhead in the conference room I quietly slipped into. I sat there, notebook open, staring at the city lights through the glass wall. I thought about how many women, how many professionals, regardless of gender, had been in my place, undermined not by their performance, but by the quiet, strategic smears that made others doubt them. I wasn't just documenting anymore. I was preparing. The next morning, I was called into a room that used to be a storage closet but had been converted into the internal audit team's temporary headquarters. Files were stacked high on folding tables. A whiteboard covered in timelines and names. Computer monitors glowing with logs and data. David, the lead auditor, greeted me with a firm nod. "Diane, thanks for coming in," he said. "We have a few questions about some recent irregularities." I sat down, heart steady, eyes focused. "We'll start with this," he continued, turning the monitor toward me. On the screen was an email that appeared to be sent from my account, but I knew instantly that I hadn't written it. It contained outdated information, and it had been sent to a critical client. "We've confirmed it came from a shared workstation," David said. "Your credentials were entered manually. This wasn't phishing. It was internal." I nodded. "I reported this the day it happened," I said calmly. "I've been keeping records." David offered a small smile, relieved, maybe. "We're glad you did, because we found more. Emails altered. Spreadsheets changed. Authorizations removed. Every incident tied back to shared devices or, more notably, to login sessions connected to Ryan's assistant's credentials." I felt a knot form in my stomach. I hadn't wanted to believe it could go that deep, but now I had confirmation. David continued, more cautiously this time. "We're not making formal accusations yet, but there's a pattern here, Diane. One that's hard to ignore. Sabotage, intended to discredit you." I nodded again, quieter this time. "So what happens now?" David looked down at the file, then back at me. "Mr. Cole has asked for a full report.
He wants everything.
And he wants it presented directly to him. No filters." I took a deep breath. "Then I'll be there." David raised an eyebrow. "You're not required. This is an internal handoff." "No," I said, my voice firm. "I want to look them in the eye." That night, I barely slept. Not out of fear, but out of a strange, simmering clarity. I kept thinking about the others. Those who had left over the past year. People I had worked beside, mentored, respected. Talented people who moved on quietly. Now I wondered, how many of them had been quietly pushed? How many had left because someone had made them feel like they weren't enough? I didn't have proof, but I had a feeling. And I was done letting feelings go unspoken. It wasn't just about saving my job anymore. It was about something bigger, something that mattered more than any title. It was about truth. And I was ready for it to come out. 2 weeks had passed since the audit meeting, but the ripple effect hadn't stopped. If anything, it had grown louder in whispers, in side glances, in the way conversations hushed whenever I entered a room. Ryan hadn't returned to the office, and his absence spoke volumes. For a man who once swaggered through the hallways like he owned the oxygen, he had vanished without a trace. No dramatic exit, no final speech. Just a quiet HR announcement that his position was being evaluated, followed by radio silence. But people talk, especially when tension has simmered so long it's practically baked into the carpet. The truth had leaked about the sabotage, the fake emails, the altered spreadsheets, all tied back to his assistant's login. It wasn't just that Ryan tried to ruin my name. It was that he'd done so recklessly, in ways that put the entire company at risk. He hadn't just made a personal attack. He had made a professional miscalculation that nearly destroyed our most important contract. The board couldn't ignore it. The evidence was too solid, too damning. A week after the audit results were finalized, a quiet message went out. Ryan was officially terminated. The reason? Breach of internal ethics policies and conduct unbecoming of leadership. No press release.
No farewell cake.
Just a name removed from the company directory and an empty office that no one wanted to talk about. I thought I'd feel triumphant when it happened. I thought I'd want to scream, "I told you so," from the rooftop. But I didn't. What I felt was calm. Not peace, not joy, just a deep, steady calm. I had stood in a storm that nearly unmade me, and I hadn't bent. That was enough. A few days later, Mr. Cole called me into his office again. There was something in his voice, gentler than usual. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped inside. On his desk was a closed folder. He didn't push it toward me immediately. Instead, he spoke with the careful tone of a man who'd been turning something over in his mind for a while. "I've had time to reflect on everything that happened," he said, "and what this company needs moving forward." He looked at me directly. "You've shown more leadership in the past month than some people show in their entire careers. You protected our biggest deal. You navigated a personal betrayal with professionalism. You inspired others to speak up. That's the kind of strength I want at the table." He slid the folder across the desk. Inside was a promotion letter, Director of Client Strategy, an executive-level position that would report directly to him. For a long moment, I said nothing, not because I wasn't honored, but because I wanted to be sure. "I didn't ask for this," I said. "I know," he replied. "That's why you deserve it." I nodded slowly. "If I accept this, I want more than just a new title. I want a voice in how we move forward. I want to rebuild a culture where people don't have to fear retribution for speaking the truth." He didn't hesitate. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." I walked back to my desk, the letter in hand, and sat for a while. Not because I was uncertain, but because the weight of it all was finally lifting. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the office lights began to flicker off one by one, I stepped into what would be my new office. Temporary for now, while renovations were underway. It was modest, a little dusty, and the nameplate hadn't been updated yet. But it felt right. I stared at the door for a long time. For years, I had walked these halls wondering if anyone saw the work I did, the late nights, the fires I put out, the clients I calmed with steady hands and practiced grace. I had told myself staying quiet was noble, that humility was enough. But the truth? Silence had nearly cost me everything. Being overlooked doesn't mean you're not capable. And kindness isn't weakness. I had been underestimated, tested, and nearly erased, but I was still standing. And not just standing, I was rising. And this time, I wasn't doing it quietly. The weeks that followed felt different, quieter in some ways, but also fuller. There was no dramatic celebration, no marching band to announce that the storm had passed, but something more powerful settled in: respect. It was in the way colleagues looked me in the eye again, no longer unsure of where I stood. It was in the private emails I received from people I had mentored over the years, people who had watched what happened from the sidelines and told me, in their own quiet words, that they were proud of me, not because I had won anything flashy, but because I hadn't walked away, because I had chosen to stay and rebuild what someone else had tried to tear down. As Director of Client Strategy, I knew I had more than just a new office and a new title. I had an opportunity to reshape a culture. I started with the things I had always wished someone else would do. I reinstated team members who had been unfairly sidelined during Ryan's reign, people whose contributions had gone unnoticed simply because they refused to play politics. I created an anonymous feedback system where employees could raise concerns without fear of retaliation. I made space for new ideas, even from the newest interns, because I knew what it felt like to have your voice dismissed before it was even heard. One afternoon, I scheduled a town hall. Nothing fancy, just an open forum in the break room. Coffee and cookies on the side table, and no slide decks. I stood in front of my team, the same people who had watched me pack a cardboard box weeks earlier, and I told them the truth. "We're not going to pretend the last few months didn't happen," I said. "We're not sweeping anything under the rug. We're going to build something stronger, together. And we're going to start by listening, not just leading." The room was quiet for a beat. Then someone clapped. And then another. And soon, the entire space filled with the kind of applause that doesn't come from performance. It comes from relief, from belief, from hope. Outside of work, things shifted too. I started taking walks in the evening again, the kind I used to enjoy before long hours and burnout stole that time. I called my sister more often, visited my niece's school recital, and started reading a book I'd bought 3 years ago and never opened. It wasn't just about balance. It was about remembering that I existed outside of work, too. But what surprised me most was the younger employees, the ones just starting out in their careers, who began stopping by my office. Not for approval, not even for career advice, always. Sometimes just to ask, how did you stay calm through all of that? I never had a perfect answer, but I always told them the truth. You don't always get to pick the battles, I'd say, but you get to decide who you become in the middle of them. And you don't let someone else's bad leadership shrink your worth. That seemed to land with them, and I hoped, maybe one day, they'd carry that same lesson forward for someone else. As for Ryan, word eventually made its way back to me. He had moved out of state and was interviewing at smaller firms. Some said Mr. Cole had quietly made sure no public scandal followed him out the door, a final act of mercy, or maybe fatherhood.
I didn't ask.
I didn't need to. I didn't wish him well, but I didn't wish him harm either. I just let it go, because the real victory wasn't in watching him fall. It was in knowing I had rebuilt from the ashes he tried to leave me in. One day, I passed the glass-walled meeting room where the Kingswell deal had been finalized. I paused just for a second. That single negotiation had changed the course of my career, yes, but it hadn't defined me. What had defined me was the moment I stood up, smiled calmly at the man who fired me, and walked out of his office without begging to stay. That was the moment I claimed my story. And I've carried that strength with me ever since, not as a chip on my shoulder, but as a quiet reminder of who I am, and who I refuse to let anyone take away again.